And we will now move on to the public hearing. It's a public hearing on Resolution R5434, affirming Black Lives Matter and approving the framework for Kirkland to become a safe, inclusive, and welcoming community through actions to improve the safety and respect of Black people in Kirkland and help end structural racism by partnering with those most affected. City Manager.
Okay, thank you, Madam Mayor. So we have a staff presentation on the resolution prior to opening it up for the public hearing. As we had said in the memo, but I just want to state again for the record, we are not looking for action tonight by the council. This is the opportunity to hear comments from the community and also for staff to get comments from the council members, and we'll be bringing back a resolution to a future council meeting for final adoption. So I do want to say we did receive 3 voicemails related to the public hearing that we've listened to that, depending on how many people wish to speak, we would have played at the end of the public hearing. So we do have 3 comments that were given to us over voicemail.
Good.
Oh, I'm sorry. And we also had 1 video that was sent to us, which we'd also recommend we'd play at the end after the folks who've called in live speak. So we do have those.
Thank you.
All right. And so to give the presentation, the overview of the resolution is our Assistant City Manager, Jim Lopez.
Thank you very much, City Manager, Madam Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of the council. It's a privilege to be back before you this evening. My presentation now will lay the foundation for the public hearing tonight. I'll be talking about the Safe, Inclusive, and Welcoming Framework Resolution before you. And in tonight's presentation, I'll first give a brief background. I'm going to talk about the guiding principles that led the staff to create this resolution. We'll talk about the specific elements of the resolution. There are 5 sections of it, and we will go through them in some detail. And then we'll talk about the next steps, action-oriented steps that the City Manager is proposing to the Council. There are 15 slides in this presentation. So, the background. Since the tragic killing of George Floyd by a police officer on May 25th, 2020, there have been several protests, marches, and rallies in Kirkland and across the world, calling for an end to structural racism and for our city to demonstrate that Black Lives Matter. We are surely experiencing a critical moment in our nation's history. No government, big or small, can be left out of this call to action. Certainly not the City of Kirkland. On June 16th, our council issued a powerful statement. The mayor issued a statement to us and to our community. And that statement gave clear direction to the City Manager to provide a framework for citywide response to issues of bias and racism towards our Black and brown community members. The Council directed that this framework be presented tonight, July 7th, and that it shall include a request for resources for early implementation actions and community-wide conversations on these critical topics. This is an action-oriented agenda. Now, staff was guided by several guiding principles in creating this very draft resolution. The point is to bring you ideas, to get feedback, and to work with the community to come back eventually with a final resolution. But these principles, there are 4 of them. And the first is to build on previous city work to become safe, inclusive, and welcoming. This original resolution dates all the way back to 2017. And we have done many, many things in our community to promote these principles. They are articulated in my memorandum to Council, so I won't go through them here. But there is a history of commitment by our government towards achieving this vision of the future. A very clear principle in guiding this resolution was to listen, to learn, and to partner with the Black community and people of color on actions and outcomes. This is reflective of a clear principle that we are hearing. which is nothing about us without us. A third principle is to create a broad community engagement to identify actions to increase the safety of Black residents and visitors and reduce structural racism. We don't read this principle as only a 6-month engagement campaign. We read this principle as the long game. We read this principle as taking the time to build authentic relationships with our Black and brown community, to share stories and listen, to learn and show empathy. And of course, as is the culture of our organization, to take action. Which brings us to the fourth principle, which is a guiding principle of our organization and the city manager's leadership philosophy since I have known him, which is to take action. There is a nobility in action. We have a heuristic that says the action is in the reaction. Learn, do things, learn. Evaluate, get better, but by all means, act. And I think that is very much part of why we're here tonight with a framework to move this issue forward, all of these issues. So that brings us to the draft resolution, Resolution 5434. And what I'll do is I'm going to go through the resolution as it's presented in the memorandum, so our community can see it and listen to the descriptive paragraphs or phrases in it. And then, of course, we have council feedback, and we have, I believe, a full hour or more of public hearing. So this is really designed to lay a foundation for our community to comment upon so that the council can give us guidance. The draft resolution is built into 5 sections. Section 1 is based on actions resulting in transparency. Section 2 on accountability. Section 3 on community engagement. Section 4 discusses funding. And Section 5, what the council would like staff to do next. And I'll go through each section sequentially. Section 1 talks about ideas around the police use of force public dashboard. Chief, hopefully members of the community were able to see the presentation at the study session. It was extremely informative about what the police department is doing and several of the very impressive tools that they have and are putting into play. One idea is to invest in and make a common practice a use of force public dashboard. There is also an idea for our human resources department to have a public dashboard about our hiring practices and our internal processes that involve race. There is an idea around a human services public dashboard, because I think staff is hearing very clearly from the council and the community that what we need to do is take a systemic approach to whatever solutions that we move forward on and recognize the interdependency between human services and policing and design strategies that recognize those interdependencies. And of course, in every section, we leave open the idea and the notion that the community and the council are going to constantly update us and give us guidance as to what ideas and initiatives we should consider. So every section has other strategies identified by the community and the council. So that's Section 1, transparency. Section 2 is about accountability. And there's a lot of ideas in Section 2. One idea is about the 8 Can't Wait police use of force policy review. And the chief did speak in some detail about the 8 Can't Wait challenge or the 8 Can't Wait principles. And the city is very interested in evaluating our programs, as Chief Harris did, against the 8 Can't Wait requirements. There is an idea for contracting for third-party use of force review and the use of force data, evaluation, and analysis. I think in the accountability section, you'll see several of these use of force related initiatives as the city moves to rise to the level of concern that the public has over the use of force. There's an idea for structured council use of force policy and data deliberations to make sure that the council is getting a constant stream of this information so that you can make evaluations as the oversight body of our government. The council also heard during the study session the idea of developing a policy on body camera pilot program, a pilot program for body camera policy. This is another very important accountability initiative. It does come with not insignificant funding requirements, but it is very much related to the use of force in our police department. There's also an idea to review of national best practices for alternatives to police, for servicing those experiencing homelessness, behavioral health issues, drug addiction, and other community challenges. Prop 1, part of the core of Prop 1 was recognizing this very principle about how dependent certain mental health issues are on the police department. And I can say from personal experience, it is very significant the amount of time and effort our police officers spend responding to mental health issues, as the council knows. There are many ideas, there are national best practices, and this particular idea in the resolution would ask the staff to expand upon those. There's also an idea for contracting for a city organizational equity assessment to identify gaps in diversity, inclusion, and proposed action steps to address the gaps. We have done a lot. We continue to remain committed to doing a lot, and this is a recognition, of course, that we can do more. And finally, the other strategies identified by the community and the council. So that is Section 2, accountability.
Jim, can we take a question here?
Yes, of course.
Councilmember Nixon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question is just that the term dashboard is very much city or government jargon. Jim, could you just quickly explain to everyone what we mean by a dashboard?
Sure, and thank you for that. A dashboard is a place, perhaps a single place, where the community can go to see information that's presented clearly, simply, intuitively, to get answers to questions that they may have. So think of it almost as a site on your computer screen that presents data in perhaps images, graphs, pie charts, or just numbers that answer questions that the community may have. Frequently asked questions like numbers of incidents, types of incidents, frequencies of incidents. And the community can actually play an important role in designing, quote, dashboards so that they are intuitive and easy to read and understand, and that they answer the questions that the community is interested in getting answered.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So moving to Section 3, the resolution calls for significant community engagement. This process would be centered around Black people. We would also target additional stakeholder engagement. We would utilize our ability to conduct town halls, virtual meetings, small group discussions. We would put the full force of our surveys and mailers and social media campaigns. And we would utilize the council retreat and public hearing process, which can be a very effective way for the community to hear the council deliberate about issues that take a longer time and need more exposure to the public as these complex issues are evaluated. And I think those particular council events can be used very effectively in this regard. Of course, we are always open for other strategies. And I would say that the engagement element, Section 3, is very much embedded in this process because staff fully expects the council to direct us as we create the resolution itself to work closely with the community as we iterate through the drafts to bring you a final draft. So Section 3 is a priority as we speak. Section 4 addresses the critical issue of funding, especially in these days where funding is such a critical issue. We are asking for the funding for outside review of police use of force, essentially This section parallels the asks in the other section. So whatever the council seeks to prioritize in sections 1 through 3, the staff would be ready, willing, and able to present you the cost benefit of how we might implement those items. Community engagement strategies, the cost to implement ideas from community engagement, national best practice reviews, and to continue to develop our work on equity assessments, both internally and externally. And again, to fashion whatever funding strategies the council seeks to prioritize for the staff. And finally, Section 5 directs the city manager to return to the council on a clear timeline. The timeline we have is August 4th, although staff would be ready on July 21st with funding recommendations for council authorization to implement the elements of this framework resolution. I think part of the important decision-making criteria for Section 5 is having sufficient time to work with the community, especially Black people, to make sure that we are listening and articulating those provisions in the resolution most meaningful to them. Which brings me to next steps, which in some ways ends where I began. Next steps are, of course, all about action. So following tonight's hearing, we hope to have direction from the council on the ideas presented in the resolution itself. We also hope the council can give us clear direction on the timeline to work with the community and come back with a final proposal for the resolution. And that is my presentation.
Okay. I think that means that I will now open the public hearing. As noted before, the council will welcome up to an hour for public comment. 3 minutes will be allowed per speaker. Before we begin receiving public comment, the staff will help determine the number of speakers wishing to participate. I failed to do this in the first session, so I will mention it now, but we will ask you to give us your full names when you introduce yourself. For this public hearing, there will not be a limitation on the number of speakers who can express a particular viewpoint. If you are participating in tonight's meeting by Zoom, do not wish to speak, we again encourage you to watch the meeting by live stream through the city's website to help us better manage the Zoom aspect of this. So with that, if you are participating by Zoom, oh, wait a minute, one other issue. I'll give you the order in which we're going to receive comments tonight. First, we want to invite Black members of the community who wish to speak first to please do so. We want especially to make sure that those voices are heard. Next, we will hear from other members of the community participating by either Zoom or telephone. And I believe we have some recorded messages we'll hear at the end. So now, if you are participating by Zoom, please click on the participants box to raise your hand to be recognized. For those participating by phone, please dial *9 to be recognized. And this will be now, if you are a Black member of the community wishing to speak, can you please click the raise hand box or on Zoom, or to be recognized on the phone, dial *9. And since I don't have enough screens to watch all this, I'm going to give
Staff will be compiling, and then the deputy city manager will let you know how many folks we have in each category in just a second.
exactly.
So right now we have 4 individuals who raised their hand to the first question.
Super.
And then if we could ask those individuals, because we have them marked down, to turn off their raised hand, and then just to make sure that we have all the other individuals that they all want to speak, ask everyone else who would like to speak in the public hearing to raise their hand or dial *9.
So you're ready for the second group to raise their hands now?
Right, we just want to make sure that everybody wants to speak, and then we'll have the total number.
Okay, so now anyone else who wishes to speak, will you please click the raise hand button or raise hand box in Zoom or dial *9 if you're phoning in.
And just so right now, it does not appear we have anyone on the phone, so everyone seems to be in by Zoom.
So we'll just take a moment to make sure everyone finds the button. Just bear with us a moment. We're just. So right now it looks like we have 7 additional members who want to speak for a total of 11. And so I think our thought is to walk through the individuals who've raised their hands so far, and then we can check in when we finish that list and see if there's anyone else who wants to speak.
That sounds good.
Okay. I'm sorry, can we just have the first group, the first 4, raise their hands again? Have the...
Trying to make sure we get them in the right order.
Tracy, and I'll just let you introduce them.
Yes, thank you. Okay. And we think we'll be able to get to everyone who wants to speak, so even if we don't get it in exactly the right order. Again, we just ask that you state your name because we don't have the full names of everyone. The first name we have is, so it's these first?
Yeah, Alicia.
Okay, Alicia Ramirez. And then the next after that is Ngozi and Nikayla Rice. Those are the next 2.
Are you with us, Alicia?
Yes, I'm here.
Welcome.
Okay. Thank you, Council, for letting me speak tonight. My name is Alicia Ramirez. I have grown up in Kirkland. I've moved here in the early 90s. I'm also a Black woman. And this discussion is decades overdue, but I'm glad it's happening now. My experiences growing up Black here in Kirkland, back in the 90s, we were not welcome. There were stares when we moved into a new neighborhood, whispers of why are these people here? My earliest memories that I can remember as a child is being called an N-word by a parent at the King State Library story time when I was 4 years old. And that is a memory that to this day I carry with me. I'm glad to see that Kirkland is a little bit more of an inclusive place now than it was back then when I was a child, but we still have a long way to go. And if the discourse in the last month with senior community members shows anything, it's that some wounds are clearly not healed. I appreciate the council for bringing this to attention, especially now. And I would urge the council to really listen to the Black folks in this community. We have the right to breathe, to feel safe in our communities, to walk down the street and not be profiled, to go see a movie and not be profiled, or even to eat ice cream and not be profiled. What happened in 2018 with Menchie's is not the first time a Black person or a person of color has been profiled here. And if you are Black and you grew up in this community, especially 20 years ago, then you most likely were profiled. as I was, as my father was, as many of my Black relatives were here growing up. I urge the council to really also take a look at our police force, to really gauge how they're treating our community and make sure that the funds are not just all being spent on police, but also community programs like counseling and mental health services and those things that will keep kids from getting into the prison system in the first place. It's been a very painful time for my family, especially here. The George Floyd protest has brought a lot of painful memories back from not just my childhood growing up here, but also how Black people are treated on a daily basis. I urge you to also really partner with Black families. Often it is the Black families that suffer the most. And I really urge you to really look at how our local police treat our people of color here, because just like many other places, Kirkland also has problems in our own policing and how we police and interact with people of color. I'm very thankful that council is having this discussion now, because it is time, more than time, for these discussions to happen. And if I can ask only one thing, it's to hold to your promise to really listen to the Black people in this community and listen to our needs and listen to the things that we need to keep us safe and to have us stay healthy.
Alicia, thank you so much for calling us tonight. I'm afraid that your time is up, but I don't want you to lose connection with us. Somehow I want you to help us as we move forward. So I'm hoping that you will reach out to us with contact information so that we can continue this conversation.
I will email the council with my contact information, and I will plan on being involved with this conversation going forward. And thank you, council, for having this discussion now, because as I said, it is critical that this happens.
Thank you, Alicia. God bless you for calling us.
So next we have Ngozi.
Welcome, Ngozi.
Hi, how are you doing? I had shared my question earlier, but I can briefly and really quickly go over it again. So my name is Ngozi Woko, and I live in the Finn Hill neighborhood with my family, my husband and 2 young kids. So like Alicia mentioned above, as a Black woman, I have felt, there have been times when I have felt not comfortable even walking around my neighborhood. One specific instance was my daughter was 2 months at the time, and I had her strapped in front of me like an ergo carrier. And I had not only suspicious looks, but a police officer drive by me, make a U-turn in a cul-de-sac, and literally ride by me as I was walking down the streets. He looked at me, I looked at him, and I proceeded to pick my phone up, or at least grab my phone, unlock it, and call my husband to let him know what was going on. I have lived in this neighborhood since 2011, and so it caught me off guard that things like that still happened. Now, that said, I'm curious for the council to elaborate really on the SRO aspect that was discussed earlier. I am, especially after Council Member Amy Falcone spoke, I really resonate with what she said, and I'm curious to know the school boards that voted for middle schools, for SROs in the middle school systems. As my kids grow, I worry especially about the school to prison pipeline. And I'm curious to know the kind of training and, well, there's the training aspect, but really why is it required as opposed to having psychologists or people that can actually help the kids in the schools that do not have weapons on them? So hoping that you guys can elaborate on this either sometime now or in the future.
Thank you very much. Nancy. We will try to meet that expectation as we move through this process. And thank you for calling us tonight. And just like I asked Alicia, please keep communication open with us. We need to learn and grow.
I will. Thank you so much.
Okay, the next three are Nikayla Rice, Zelda Menard, and Kalika Curry. So Nikayla Rice is next.
Welcome, Michaela.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nikayla Rice. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank Councilwoman Amy Falcone for the opportunity to speak here today. As a Black and Mexican woman recently moved to Kirkland, I can already see that change needs to happen in our community. I'd like to bring on board that all Kirkland police officers are sworn an oath, which is, on my honor, I will never betray my badge, my integrity, my character, or the public's trust. I will always have the courage to hold myself and others accountable for our actions, and I will always uphold the Constitution and the community I serve. When I read this oath, something has already been broken, and you can guess which ones they are. Betraying the public's trust. And not that I'm saying that all cops are bad or cops in Kirkland are, but when it comes to accountability, it doesn't seem like police are being held accountable. I myself have never experienced any negative interactions with police officers, which may seem surprising with some, I'm sorry. Most police are very warm, kind-hearted people. But when I hear there's only one bad egg in the bunch, it doesn't make me feel any safer knowing that there's still one. This brings me to my first issue with the present police system and what I think needs to see the most change, and that's accountability. And when we talk about defunding the police, it doesn't mean taking the money they've appropriated from the government, but using that money in manners consistent with equal rights, fair treatment, rule of law, and American value. Sorry, almost there. And when we talk about police being in our schools, that's something that triggers me. There's 65 schools in our district, and each one of them have more police on campus than counselors and safe spaces combined. And not everyone is privileged enough to have safe spaces at home and are able to talk. I was in foster care a lot of my youth, and I have been to more school districts than most. And not once did I have the opportunity to talk to a counselor because they weren't there. I'm not gonna go to a police officer to talk to them about my personal problems because that's not their job. Their job is to serve and protect our community. A counselor is there to support the social and emotional needs for our students. How could we have one or two counselors in each school for these thousands of students that all have emotional and social needs, but those funds are spent on campus police? A rally will be organized June 19th in downtown Kirkland at the waterfront for the community awareness of what's going on, and everyone is invited and welcome to attend. And again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to speak here today, and let's not forget the importance of community awareness. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikayla. Please stay in touch.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Next, we have Zelda Menard.
Zelda, welcome.
Oh, hi. Okay.
Hi.
Hello, my name is Zelda Menard, and I live in South Rose Hill with my 13-year-old son. And I just wanted to thank you for having me, and wanted to share that the strategies put forth in the draft resolution definitely do a lot to hold police accountable, and that would be in the heat of the moment and after the fact. But if we really want to have police officers change, we have to figure out how to help them show up differently so they're not driving by woman and her baby walking down the street that she shared, intimidating our community members of color. And just kind of trying to rework my thoughts because it sounds maybe simplistic, but many police forces in different communities in the West Coast especially are looking into using mindfulness, which is bringing presence and awareness to police officers, which allows them to view and interact with their community in a whole different way, de-escalate volatile situations, and improve their own well-being. And sounds maybe selfish, and why are we talking about the police well-being? But while by they knowing who they are and being, in themselves, can then see the community in a whole new light. One Oregon police officer who instructs others, police officers, that mindfulness opens up a space in which we make decisions. By regulating stress responses and emotions like anger, fear, and ego, police officers become more aware of their options. And police officers, they high rates of depression and all kinds of things, and attempt suicide earlier than other populations. And this sounds maybe trivial. They're also killing people unnecessarily and over force, amounts of force. But just this is to say that officers trained in mindfulness have been found to, in themselves, be better people, grounded, sleeping, emotion regulation, anger, fatigue, sleep disturbance, and all this then translates into how they interact with the community. And officers trained in mindfulness have made better use of force decisions than untrained control groups. And mindfulness builds greater compassion toward the communities they served. I'll just close and say that mindfulness practices are not a technique or a process. They would become the bedrock of an organization, woven into the culture, changing the culture, and woven into the core of who an individual is. I hope that Kirkland will truly invest in mindfulness to bring calm and a whole new interaction with our community members and the police, whether in their streets, domestic calls, or in our schools. Because right now, even the school system, our backup plan is punishment and consequences that are, we can't think of the right word right now because I'm nervous, but I'll just end there. Thank you.
Okay, Zelda, thank you very much. I have been trained in mindfulness. I absolutely agree with you. This has got to be part of the conversation. So again, thanks for joining us tonight. I hope you will somehow figure out a way to keep connected as we move forward on this path. So thank you.
All right, next is Kalika Curry.
Kalika, welcome.
Sorry about that. It took a moment for me to be able to unmute myself here. So thank you for having me. Appreciative to speak in front of you all, and thankful for all the people that have joined to put their voices to this issue. My name is Kalika Curry. I'm a mother of 3 Black children. I myself am Black. My father is a Black homeowner in Kirkland. I was born and raised in Kirkland, graduate of Lake Washington School District, and spent many years working in the city of Kirkland in many different ways. And because of the ongoing racism that I experienced, I have chosen to remove myself and my family and anything else regarding Kirkland from the city for our safety and health and well-being, just doubling down on a lot of the trauma that I've heard other people speak to. At the same time, have a deep heart for this community and truly believe that if we're able to center people of color, and particularly Black people, that this group will be able to continue to chip away at the issues that we're seeing in this community. So I just want to urge that I appreciate the plan and the agenda that's been drafted, but just recognizing that the first step really does have to be developing relationships with Black people so that you can center them in this process. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Kalika. And I'm sure we're going to count on you for keeping us on our toes with regard to following this process.
Thank you, Mayor Sweet.
All right, the next 3, next is Sarah Mortland, followed by Kirsten Hansen and Amy Morrison.
Sarah, welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. My name is Sarah Mortland and I live in Rose Hill. Since you can't see me, I'll clarify that I am white. But the first thing I would like to say is that I support the council's decision to let the voices of Black people and people of color lead their decisions regarding racial equality and justice in Kirkland. But I want to remind the council and everyone in our city that systemic racism and white supremacy are problems that white people created, and that is ultimately the responsibility of white people to solve them. We must listen to Black and Indigenous people of color and take responsibility to act on their recommendations. I would also like to remind the council that when people of color advise you, that is real emotional and mental labor that they are doing for you, and you must recognize that and not take it for granted. It might help to think of them more as consultants rather than volunteers. Looking at the specific proposals in this resolution, these are all perfectly fine ways to ascertain to what extent police in Kirkland use force. But focusing on the police is not the only thing you should be doing to ensure that Kirkland is a safe, inclusive, and welcoming community. Police are not the be-all and end-all of keeping us data and history that shows that throwing money at police departments does not necessarily reduce crime or make us safer. What keeps us safe is having a home, food on the table, access to education, access to healthcare, among many other things. So that means that the council must not only focus on policing, but must also direct funding and enact legislation to address things such as the need for affordable housing and equitable funding of education. Kirkland cannot be a safe, inclusive, and welcoming community for all if only a select few can afford to live here, for example. I sincerely hope that the steps outlined in this resolution are merely the beginning and that we will see the council and the city take broader and more comprehensive steps going forward. I also want to mention that I think any reviews of police use of force must be done by a third unbiased party. One of the problems with our current system is that police and the criminal justice system in which they are embedded are the ones who make the decisions about whether the use of force was reasonable or justified. One last specific thing I want to mention is that I think that the council and the Kirkland School Board must follow the lead of many other cities around the country and seriously consider the value and necessity of having police in our schools and the negative effect this can have on youth. Although the city has clearly put a lot of work into developing the SRO program, I think that sometimes public opinion can shift rapidly, and I think it would be appropriate for the council to respond to that. Thank you for listening to my comment. That's all I have for you.
Thank you, Sarah. We really appreciate your sharing your wisdom with us.
All right.
I'm sorry, Tracy, I forget who was next.
Kirsten Hansen.
Kirsten, welcome.
Hello. Thank you, Mayor, and you, Council, for giving us all this opportunity to speak. I just wanted to point out that we just learned in the study session from the police chief that 19% of use of force incidents were used on Black citizens. According to the 2019 census, the Black community in Kirkland is only 1.2%. So let me repeat, 19% of use of force incidents were used on Black citizens. In addition, in reviewing the Menchie's incident report, we learned that unwanted subject case reports breakdown shows 24% of those cases are against Black citizens. So to me, these are alarming and are exactly why we need more transparency and accountability within our police force in order to be a truly safe community for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen. And I believe Amy Morrison is next.
That's correct.
Good evening. Mayor Sweet, council members, Amy Morrison. I'm the president of Lake Washington Institute of Technology, and I live in downtown Kirkland. For more than 7 years, Lake Washington Tech has been intentionally engaged in equity, diversity, and inclusion work. And the college has committed a significant amount of time and resources to create a community that is based on our values of respect, collaboration, and inclusion. I promised our college community that we would redouble our efforts to end systemic racism and oppression. It is our responsibilities as educators to teach inclusion and acceptance and to weave this into our coursework and operations. Above all, it is our responsibility as human beings to stand up to racism and oppression of Black people. Black people deserve safety and respect and the right to breathe. I'd like to underscore some of the previous comments, especially those made by Jim Lopez and Kalika Curry. If people in authority truly care about the safety and respect of Black people, they will, with Black people in our community, work to figure out what is helpful rather than continue to do things to Black people that they may not and do not want. Like you on the council, I'm striving to model this leadership as a white leader at Lake Washington Tech as well. I do want to note that I am very proud to have served as a member of the Welcoming Kirkland Initiative Planning Group, and it has really been a professional and personal privilege of mine to serve with this esteemed group. I look forward to the work that we will continue to do together in partnership to end systemic racism in our community. Thank you for your leadership and for presenting this resolution to the community for consideration this evening.
Thank you very much, Amy.
All right, the next three are first name Michelle, Agbi Linda Odom, and James Whitfield.
Okay. Michelle, welcome.
And if you could say your first and last name, that would be helpful for the record.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I've never done this before. It's my first time. I am a resident here in Kirkland. I grew up here in the 70s and 80s, and I'm very excited that the city is doing this. I just want to express that we have a long way to go, and I support our Black community. I am actually mixed brown with Asian and all kinds of stuff, but I have dark skin. And I too went through many things with my family growing up here. And I just want you to know there's a long history of emotions for lots of people that grew up here and had to adjust or make other people feel comfortable around us and had to walk on a different kind of path. But I'm very glad to hear that this is happening in the community. But I think it's very important that you listen to the Black community as well and how to make it more inclusive. For the longest time, I wanted to leave Kirkland because it wasn't inclusive. And I did live in California for a little while, but I came back because this is where I'm from and my parents are here. And I don't want to leave because I feel like we're moving forward or making changes to be more inclusive. And my kids I have one in Juanita Elementary and another in Finn Hill, and I live in the Juanita area. But I see how Juanita has done a really good job with being inclusive in a lot of the programs there. And when we talk about the SRO or being involved with the schools, I feel I'm also not really comfortable with that. I would much prefer that money and effort and energy go towards community services and counseling. I know that at Juanita they have a wonderful counselor, and she puts a lot of material out there for kids to use and be available and for parents to use, but not all parents have the energy and time to invest to do, to gain knowledge and how to, help kids out in that way. So I think if, just one counselor in that whole school, it'd be better served to have more of a team than just one counselor. I'm sure she has other people that she works with, but my point being is, as a parent, and I would rather see that money and effort go towards community solutions than just enforcement and punishment, because there's a lot that leads to that point where a child gets to the point where they would, get in trouble. And And I think also when it comes to the police, I am not comfortable with any kind of restraint that is used that constricts breathing in any person in any way. And I read on the sheriff's board that there's training for that, but I still just don't even think that should be part of the I guess the policy or program, because when you do reviews, it's going to be mapped back to what's in place for a policy. And if there's room in the policy or gray area in the policy, then if an incident happens, they can say, well, they were following policy. So it really just goes back to that framework to make sure that there is no gray area. It's very explicit. And another thing with the policing, I think, is I know it's a hard job and it takes a certain person to do it, but maybe that's part of the problem is these people don't have the ability to make those quick decisions and coping skills, because when it comes into the heat of the moment, it has to be instinctive to make the right decisions. And to say it was in the heat of the moment and I lost control is just not okay when you have power and authority and weapons to use on somebody. So.
Okay, thank you so much.
That's
Jill.
it. Thank
And
you.
if you wouldn't mind putting your last name in the chat for our public record, that would be helpful. And thank you for giving Kirkland another chance. We want you to help us make it better for you and your kids.
Thank you.
All right, next is Agbi Linda Odom.
Hello, good evening. This is OGB, Linda Odom. Thank you guys for this opportunity, and I really love that this is being done. But as we sat through the reading session and the learning session, as we went through the policies and the program and heard the officers and the representatives with the city speak, it felt more like a proposal to ensure that the policies like the SRO and the use of force policies are continuously entrenched within our community. And I'd like to see us kind of take a look at that, because us, the community, and I am a Black woman, I live in Kirkland, I'm a renter right now, and I'd like to buy a home in this community. I like to raise kids in this community, but I don't want my kids to be scared of walking like my friends that are Black in this community who are scared of taking a walk in their neighborhood that they deserve to feel safe in. So I'd like to see the dashboard kind of break out data behind how often use of force is used within the community and the race of people the use of force is used against. I mean, I've heard the training and the background of the great officers that help police our communities, but real life is very different from a calm training environment. And in real life, people are going to use the tools that are readily available to them. And for the most part, people are going to be very reactive. So when you tell me that the cardioid restraint control hold is one of the tools that officers know to use, I mean, that just tells me that that's a very subjective tool for them to use. And who is to say, whether it was necessary or not? And we've seen the videos for George Floyd where he's saying that he can't breathe, and the officers that are meant to police and keep him safe just ignored him, and he died with 8 minutes of that force being put against his throat. They're not doctors. So I think it's very unfair to put that kind of responsibility on the officers. And I hope that you guys really listen to us and maybe redirect some of the funds that go to the police officers, or find more funds to actually get mental health professionals to deal with these types of situations, and train officers to partner with those professionals to come in for those type of calls where they think that it's not necessarily a violent situation, but more of a domestic or a civil issue where well-trained people could come in and actually address those mental health issues. Thank you once more for this opportunity, but I really hope you listen to us and understand that for our community, that use of force, the SROs, is a threat to us, and our kids are scared to go in places where they should feel safe. I'm scared as a grown woman to sometimes walk in my neighborhood because, I don't know if I'm going to make it home. So please take a listen to all of what we're saying, because it is very important to us and it is life and death for us.
Okay, OGB, thank you very much for calling us. I hope that you will stay connected to us as we work through this work. We need your voice loud and clear.
Right. The next speaker is James Whitfield, and then followed by first name Brittany.
Welcome, James.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council members. It is good to see you. I know that I know many of you because of my role at Leadership Eastside for roughly 10 years, and as a Kirkland resident, when the incident happened in Menchie's, I was called upon to step in and both help with the town hall and ultimately facilitate the Welcoming Kirkland initiative, which is one of the reasons why I have the privilege of having been on the telephone with the police a couple of months ago to let her know in a conversation we were having that I did not feel safe enough to go jogging in my own neighborhood. And this was before George Floyd. It has to do with all the reasons that have been pointed out already. In addition to the fact that Ahmaud Arbery was killed by vigilantes, which for me, frankly, was the straw that broke the camel's back. I simply did not feel safe enough to go running in my neighborhood of Houghton, Kirkland, because of the issues that we've been discussing today, which is one of the reasons why I find myself here as a member of the Right to Breathe Committee, which is a group of Black people who are working to ensure that local governments take policy action to ensure safety and respect for Black people. Our core principles for Right to Breathe are abolishing systemic anti-Blackness to ensure equal justice, oversight and accountability through equitable shared decision-making, as Jim Lopez mentioned, nothing about us without us, and de-escalation of encounters with people who are enforcing laws and rules against Black people. So our encouragement would be that at every step of the way, as you move this draft resolution through, that you would really ensure that a true partnership with the people that you're trying most to benefit are involved, that Black people are involved at every step of the way to ensure that people of authority can be effective with identifying real sustainable change that benefits Black people, as opposed to simply identifying things that frankly makes the majority of the folks in our community feel better and don't necessarily meet the needs of the people that I know you truly want to help. I know that it's difficult to do that as a local government. I know that because of sort of the principles of colorblindness that have been core to local government, that it's difficult to focus and prioritize one group of people over another. But I do want to remind us that historically speaking, when America has taken policy action to address the civil rights issues for Black people, other marginalized groups have benefited. The recent Supreme Court ruling for LGBTQ people in our country was based upon the Civil Rights Act of 1965. And that's just one example of the fact that when we focus on the systemic issues that are associated with anti-Black racism, it actually creates a foundation to benefit everyone in our community. It turns out that it's rare that the opposite is true. It's rare that when issues are addressed for other marginalized groups, that those benefits then accrue to Black people. That is a rare occurrence in our history. So I just want to remind us that one of the benefits of focusing on anti-Black racism and really looking at the roots, partnering with Black people in order to ensure that we're addressing those things, is that it creates a foundation that then can be used to benefit other marginalized groups in our community. So please understand that when we say we're urging you to work and partner with Black people on this issue, it's not just because this is a Black Lives Matter moment. It's because historically speaking, we know that by focusing on those systemic level issues, it creates a way to address other issues that affect other people. The last thing I want to say is 2020 has been a ridiculously crazy year. I know that lots of things have happened that certainly have a similar level of intensity as you're facing in this particular issue right now. But I do want to make sure that I remind us that we owe it to our ancestors and we owe it to our descendants in order to get this right. Too many times in our history, we haven't actually taken the steps that are necessary to make real change occur. We have put Band-Aids on really significant issues, and now is an opportunity for us to actually make real change. When people ask you in 10 years from now or 20 years from now, what were you doing in the year 2020? I hope that you'll be able to tell them that you took real action in order to undo systemic racism in Kirkland, and that you can be proud of the fact that you partnered with Black people in order to make that happen. I appreciate the fact that you are considering this resolution, and I strongly encourage you to continue to move forward in this direction. I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. And I hope that we can continue this partnership, and particularly listening to Black voices in this meeting tonight. I hope that they will all stay involved with us as well on this journey.
Thank you, Mayor.
So the last hand that we have raised at the moment is first name Brittany.
Yep. Hi, can you hear me?
Brittany, what's your last name?
Marzette.
Marzette? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So my name is Brittany Marzette. I am a mother that lives in the Finn Hill area of 2 young children. I moved to Kirkland in 2015. I first just want to start out by sharing one of my experiences that I had, and thank all of those that have shared their experiences, because I think it's important for people to hear truly what it's like to be Black in Kirkland. So I was cornered in Met Market by a white woman, I'll say that I did not know. She proceeded to interrogate me. Ironically, it shouldn't matter what I was wearing, but I had just come from work and was dressed very professionally. I was in the store with my 3-year-old daughter. And at the time she interrogated me, asking me, I have never seen you here before. And we were cornered in a bathroom. Like, I did not physically have an opportunity to leave without like having to move by her. She interrogated me in front of my daughter, asking, I've never seen you here before. Do you live around here? And my daughter, after leaving, was like, Mommy, why was she asking you all of those questions? And that obviously is it's an experience that I don't want to have to explain to my child why I'm being cornered in a grocery store of not belonging, basically. And so I wanted to share my experience, but also thank those who have also shared their experience and help the council understand that reliving these experiences and telling them to you while we want to help can also be very emotional. And even in reading or listening to some of the other speakers, it was emotional for me as I listened to the person talk about, going from school to school, or others who have talked about leaving and not wanting to come back. So while our hearts want to help and we want change, because obviously it needs to happen, please also recognize that reliving this can be very emotional for us as we do that. And I want to thank the woman who also spoke up, the white woman, I forget your name, I'm sorry, who also said that the responsibility isn't just on us to raise our voices, but also we need support from others in doing that as well. And then finally, just as a parent, I want to speak to the SRO and the police and schools. My kids are young right now. They'll be starting in the public school systems next year, but that is also something that very much concerns me. My daughter was targeted in her daycare as having behavioral problems. In comparison to other children, it was like, I know my daughter is a firecracker. I know she's very strong-willed, but I do think that she was targeted because of her race. And I imagine that in a public school system, if police officers were involved, that would be an issue. And so I'm very concerned about that as I send my kids into the public schools. And I just wanted to point that out as well. And then as I think about, maybe the people that supported it before, maybe their eyes have been opened to the realities of the world we live in. I have many friends, specifically white friends, who maybe would have supported something like that previously, but after now understanding the plight that puts on their fellow neighbors, maybe would reconsider. And so I ask you guys to reconsider that, because some people's eyes have been open to a new reality that we live in, or frankly, the reality we've always lived in, but others are now aware of. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brittany, and please stay part of this conversation. Okay, is there anyone else wishing to address the council?
Sorry, Debbie Lacey and MJ Carlson have raised their hands. And then
Excellent.
if there's anyone else who wants to speak but hadn't raised their hand, maybe you can do that during the next two speakers, and we'll try to record your names as well.
So Debbie, are you with us?
I am. Thank you, Mayor Sweet. Thank you all. I am Debbie Lacey. I'm a Kirkland resident. I want to thank the Right to Breathe Committee for its leadership. These are leaders who are well known and have been advancing equity on the East Side for many years. The attention to their voices, expertise, and experiences is long overdue. I'm also serving on the Lake Washington School District Equity Team and a founder of East Side for All, which launched last year to help support racial, economic, and social justice in East King County. This is certainly a time of reckoning and a call to act to transform policies, yes, and also practices, our relationships and our investments. And I do appreciate what the resolution is putting forward from the council and for you to consider regarding how you will make those investments and make them meaningful, and to do so, as James Whitfield said, in true partnership with Black leaders and Black community members. I'm grateful to the Black community members who chose to share their truth here tonight. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Debbie. MJ.
Hello again, this is MJ, or Marjorie Carlson. I live in Juanita. I want to start by saying I have new respect for the city council's fortitude in sitting still for 3 hours. This is hard work. I want to join Debbie in thanking especially the Black community members who have spoken, at personal cost in order to share with us and educate us. I'm sure you are as horrified as I am to hear how unsafe our Black neighbors feel in Kirkland, a place that I think of as, a sort of idyllic, safe community in a lot of ways. But the experience that I have as a white woman living here and the experience of so many of our Black neighbors is so starkly different. And I don't think I've ever heard it so starkly stated as tonight. So thank you for everyone who brought that. And that being said, I think we would be remiss in not bringing up the fact that what Black Lives Matter as a movement is asking for right now is not small reforms around the edges or changes in, little policies here and there. That we have a system that is really fundamentally not working and not protecting our most vulnerable community members, and we need to think really hard about what we can do to change that system. And specifically, what Black Lives Matter nationally is asking for is concretely that we take our resources from policing and put them into the social services and social network that actually keeps us safe. We know that crime is not reduced by adding police officers. Crime is reduced when you reduce unemployment rates, when you have higher homeownership rates, when people have their needs met in the community, when education is good for everyone. Those are the things that actually help all of us. So I personally would just call on the council to think about what we can do to shift resources into the things that actually create safety and a welcoming community for all of us. Accountability is another big part of that. As someone brought up, policing doesn't have an external review process right now. And we don't have a system as some cities do where there has to be a public statement if there's a use of force. I'm sure I'm not the only one who had never seen the use of force statistics before tonight. And it's shocking and appalling that 19% of uses of force are against our Black community members. That's something that we ought to know and ought to be able to keep an eye on all the time. I'm sure I'm going over time here. I can't see my chat window. I'll just end by calling out explicitly that when our policies have disparate impact on vulnerable populations, we can't just go along with what the majority wants. If adding police officers makes me as a white person feel safe, but it makes James feel like he can't go jogging anymore, then you need to not listen to me. You need to listen to the people who are most impacted, and work with the Black leaders here locally, because our Black Kirklanders deserve safety and respect. Thank you.
Thank you, MJ. Tracy, is there anybody else out there who would like to speak with us?
There are no other Zoom hands raised, but we do have the 3 voicemails and the video.
Okay, let's proceed with those.
Okay, so Chris is going to go ahead and play the 3 voicemails.
Hi, this is Allison Weinrod, Weinrod. I live in Kirkland, Washington. I am calling with a comment regarding the Kirkland police use of force item. I believe that while our city policies are obviously written from a perspective of having the right intent, I find that they do not go far enough in enforcing some sort of compliance with a use of minimal force and a de-escalation policy, because the officers themselves who are making the determination on the appropriate level of force that is to be used, or the use of de-escalation, are themselves making that determination whether or not that their own actions are appropriate. So I find that our policies are lacking because they don't set a standard for what is expected of those officers in those scenarios. I would like to see de-escalation training made more important. I would like to see a use of force policy that has clear restrictions and expectations on use of force by officers. I would also, in general, like to see our police force behaving in a manner that makes it clear that all citizens and residents are equally protected by KPD. I find that KPD's preferential treatment bordering on collegial of some groups, namely the white Second Amendment demonstrators and our local militia, seems to indicate that some groups are more deserving of KPD's umbrella of protection than others. I find that their refusal to intervene in harassment of BLM demonstrators by these self-identified militia is honestly off-putting in the extreme, and I cannot believe that we don't have higher expectations for people who serve on Kirkland Police Department. I think that is it, and honestly, I hope that we can arrive at a better and more formal use of force policy. I also feel like body cameras it's long past time for us to have those. So I would like to see those as well. Thank you.
Next one.
Jillian Butler, JILLIAN BUTLER. Members of the council, Mayor Sweet, my name is Jillian Butler and I reside in North Juanita. I wrote to you back in June following the death of George Floyd to suggest next steps for Kirkland Police. What I received in response is essentially a list of things Kirkland has already done to address equality and no explanation or plans for steps that still need to be taken. This concerned me as it implies the city of Kirkland does not recognize, despite recent publicized incidents of racial profiling of a court-appointed special advocate and excessive force used on a teenager, that there is much more work to be done to fundamentally change policing in Kirkland. Research by the Washington Post in 2015 showed at least 25% of people killed in police shootings are experiencing mental health crises. Research by the New York Times published June 19th shows that in the much larger neighboring city of Seattle, only 1.3% of calls are for violent crimes that require an armed officer to respond. Given these two statistics, I believe that we need to rethink public safety and response. While we do need armed officers available to respond to those calls that are violent crimes, we desperately need more allies for those in crisis. Armed officers with badges who often spend more hours training how to use guns/force than they do in de-escalation strategies are not who we need responding to a large percentage of calls. What we need are medical and trained mental health professionals who are equally funded. An example to look to would be the city of Eugene, Oregon, where the CAHOOTS program, which stands for Crisis Assistance Helping Out on the Streets, has run for decades. In 2019, CAHOOTS teams 1 medical professional and 1 crisis responder trained in behavioral health responded to 24,000 calls, about 20% of all dispatches, with only 150 of those dispatches requiring police backup. Given that Eugene is a much larger city of around 178,000 to our slightly less than 92,000, I believe we as a city would be much better served by allocating resources toward a similar program. Please recognize that the answer to public and community safety is not always police. It is, in fact, often best served by medical and mental health support and crisis management professionals. Considerable city funds should be dedicated to providing this type of support over armed police response. In order to raise these funds, all options should be on the table. In the past, Kirkland has often looked to only add new programs while keeping others. I ask that you consider reducing the policing budget and using that money to fund a Kahoot-style program that will more effectively serve City of Kirkland residents. Thank you for your time.
Wow.
And we have one more voicemail, and then we have the video. This is Joe Dobner.
My name's Joe Dobner. I live up in the Highlands. My name's spelled Joedobner. On May 30th, I was in downtown Seattle at the Black Lives Matter rally in Westlake when the riots broke out. I saw stores being looted and police cars on fire on my way out of downtown. Anyone who says they'd be willing to use live ammo on the kids that were doing the looting, and they were kids, that person's a psychopath. When people are passionate enough to get out in the street and protest, they're often passionate enough to fight. Protests can turn into brawls or riots pretty rapidly. This can happen when counter-protesters or police aggress against protesters with pepper sprays, flashbangs, vehicles, truncheons, whatever. All these things can and have happened in this area. Kirkland seemed to take the possibility of things getting out of hand seriously and told stores to board up when there was Black Lives Matter march here a couple days later after that. KPD, however, seems to think that having a dozen or so mostly out-of-town vigilantes of unknown discipline and temperament openly carrying firearms and hanging around downtown was a good idea. They weren't going to stop things from getting out of control, and they damn sure didn't lower the temperature. If you think they could have, ask yourself what those armed yahoos could do that a couple hundred armed riot police in Seattle couldn't, but they sure could have made things a hell of a lot worse. You may hear police say that there's nothing they could have done about their presence, that those men were acting within their rights and in accordance with the law, blah, blah, blah. That's crap. When it comes to the First Amendment, police can regulate the time, place, and manner of demonstrations. They could have set up barricades, rounded the gun guys up, and told them to go stand over there. When it comes to the Second Amendment, police still have a lot of latitude when it comes to enforcing the law. Just because you're openly carrying a firearm doesn't mean that that pistol on your ankle is legal. And if you don't have your CPL on you, you can be temporarily detained and cited. If you don't have CPL at all, you can be arrested. And there was one guy there that had a short-barreled rifle, a little conversion carbine you can get through the mail, stick a Glock receiver on it. They could have relieved that gentleman of his weapon, made sure he had the appropriate ATF engravings on the receiver, and then sat him in the squad car while they made sure he had his paperwork on file with the local law enforcement agency. There's a pretty low threshold when it comes to temporarily detaining folks. KPD themselves says no officer worth anything can find a reason to pull someone over inside of 6 blocks. That's temporary detention, and temporary detention send a message. Now, I'm not saying that KPD should have done these things, but I am saying that I have seen police around here do all of these things, and KPD decided not to. There's a balance you got to strike between law enforcement scrutiny and civil liberties, and the balance KPD seems to have struck is that black guys sitting in yogurt shops or black kids playing the drums in a community center, they get scrutiny and aggression. While a bunch of middle-aged white dudes standing along the path of the civil rights march and openly carrying firearms, they get a blind eye and welcome that. As a consequence, some of those same people were out the very next week doing the same thing, openly carrying firearms along the path of a subsequent Black Lives Matter march. Now, I'm old enough to remember the Klan doing the same thing back in North Carolina in the 80s, and the police were fine with it back then, despite it actually being against the law there. You'd think 40 years later the city of Kirkland would have progressed a little bit, but apparently we haven't. That's all I got.
So that was our final voicemail, and we have a video from Sarah Franklin, and that's our final item.
Good evening. Mayor Sweet and Kirkland City Council members and city staff. My name is Sarah Franklin, and I'm one of the organizers for Indivisible Kirkland. Our organization started in 2016 and focuses on creating a just society. I wanted to present you tonight with a statement that Indivisible Kirkland has put together regarding policing in Kirkland. Indivisible Kirkland stands in solidarity with Black-led organizations calling for defunding the police and investing in community wellness, particularly in programs that will positively impact Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. Previous efforts at changing policing have not worked, leaving us, as Angela Davis has said, trapped on a treadmill of reform. Defunding the police through efforts such as those explained in 8 to Abolition will stop the treadmill and create real change. Indivisible National Statement recently said there is a clear need to rebalance power between the police and the communities they are supposed to protect. We should call on our city leaders to cut funding for police departments and use that money to invest in meeting Black and Brown communities' needs. That means taking money out of police budgets to make sure that people have well-funded schools, good living wage jobs, affordable housing, and more. Black Lives Matter of Seattle and King County tells us that to divest from policing and invest in communities, we should create affordable housing, bolster mental health services, end youth incarceration, fully fund education, and create police-free schools. Indivisible Kirkland pledges to support organizations with particular emphasis on Black-led groups who are working to defund the police and invest in marginalized communities. Our support comes in the form of financial support, policy advocacy at the local and state levels, and amplifying the work that Black and Brown leaders are doing in our community. Because of that pledge, we call upon the City of Kirkland to do the following. Continue to build relationships with and trust with those most impacted by the systemic racism inherent in policing. Reinvest money from policing into schools, social services, and human services. Comply with 8 Can't Wait with the understanding that this is just an entry point for reform and that true systemic change will require much more work as outlined by 8 to Abolition. Implement public transparency and accountability in all areas, including real-time use of force statistics and reporting of instances of misuse of force. We cannot pretend that systemic racism exists everywhere but Kirkland. What we can do to honor the promise of a safe and welcoming Kirkland is to lean into this challenging work that will lead to transformative change. Thank you for your time this evening and for the work that has already begun in Kirkland.
So is there anyone else out there wanting to address the council?
We're just double checking.
Tracy, you see anybody?
One last check.
Yeah, we're doing one last check. Sorry. No, it looks like all the raised hands have been called upon, and
okay,
I think that's what we have.
Therefore, I will declare this public hearing to be closed. Council, as you all know, this is not just the beginning of this discussion of race and equity for the city of Kirkland. We've been immersed in a process for a number of years, and as a council have a passion about trying to get it right. To that end, do you want to continue this discussion at this time for direction in the development of the revised framework for the resolution that will be coming back to us on the 21st meeting? Or do we want to do it individually with the city manager? How do you want to proceed right now? Deputy Mayor.
Given the amazing stories that we've been hearing and heartbreaking messages, I do, and some of the comments that were made during the study session, I do think there's some among the council to talk about these things. So perhaps we could take a break and at least give each of us a chance to reflect and provide some direction.
Thumbs up? Okay, let's do that. So let's see, it's 9:05. You want to take 10 or 15? Okay, we'll try and do it in 10. Okay, thanks.
There are a couple things I do want to talk about in specifically regarding the framework resolution. So the first thing, first thing to mention is I did share with, just so my fellow council members know, and I suppose members of the public who are listening in as well, I did share a number of questions with city staff, including Chief Harris, regarding the 2016 strategic plan. So there are several recommendations in that plan that I want to, that I have questions about. I just want to find out how we're doing, how we're benchmarking against those, and what kind of success we've had. And I bring that up mainly to mention a lot of my questions really have to do with the recommendations in that plan around alternatives to armed, uniformed response to certain events and disorder in our community. And some of that groundwork has already been laid with a 2016 strategic plan that we've had in place for 4 years now, and are working towards. It's clear that this is a time of reckoning, and this is a time to take action. It's a time to take bold action. It's a time to take bold action to take the steps that will actually make our community feel safer for Black people and other people of color. And I really want us to look really closely at the alternative response to crisis events in our community with mental health professionals and that kind of thing. So I want to emphasize that. I think that is embodied in the framework. I think the framework creates a path forward to look at those. I wanted to highlight that as a point of emphasis. In addition to that, I have shared with members of the city staff kind of 10 points of reform ideas and reforms that I really want us as a city to consider. I think a lot of those, I'll run through them really quickly, but I think most of those are embodied in the framework, meaning the framework does create a platform for which we can examine and evaluate these reforms. Number one is engaging with the Black community. So having a meaningful discourse about the changes that will actually make a difference for members of our Black community. I do want us to re-examine carefully the policies on use of force, including a careful examination of the specific standards that we set. And that we heard that from members of the community, that they really want us. It's one thing to have a policy. They really want us to examine the specific standards that we create and create standards that are easy for our officers to follow and create that accountability they're looking for. Evaluating independent civilian oversight. This is actually one area that I might recommend the staff consider an addition to Section 2 of the Framework Resolution. I originally, when I read Section 2, Item B, which was contracting for third-party policy review of use of force review, I really thought that was actually talking about civilian oversight. I understand that now to be more of us, the city contracting with a third party to look at our policy regarding use of force. I would really like to add that we have in our framework, at least, serious consideration of independent civilian oversight. And I understand that takes a lot of different forms. I would like us to evaluate the different forms that takes, benchmark what we might want to do against other neighboring cities and other cities that we admire. That leads to actually another benchmarking. One of the things that I mentioned at the outset and that we've heard a lot from the community is they want us to think about how we're allocating resources in response to events that happen in our community, and making sure that both that we have the human services framework in place to help people meet their basic needs, but that we also have the framework in place for responding to crisis events that happen in our community that don't necessarily require an armed, uniformed response. And I would like us to benchmark where Kirkland is, and this is part of our transparency. So again, I think it's included in the framework resolution, but understanding where do we stand with our devotion of resources, both on human services that help people meet their basic needs, together with the services that we provide for crisis events, and then of course the need to have law enforcement officers enforcing the law with respect to crime and responding to violent or semi-violent events in our community. So benchmarking that. And I also, very closely related to that is, and I think the city is doing this, but I just want to make it a point of emphasis that when we think of that public safety priority that's always a star in our community annual community survey. It's something the community feels really strongly about. It's also something we tend to get really high marks on from the community. I really want us to think about that public safety, that fire, police, and EMT. I want us to think more broadly about that, not just as police and fire and EMT, but actually what we're doing holistically for our community to create safety and safe places. So that includes the human services things that I was talking about. I do want us to evaluate the results of of doing a body cam pilot program. I do want us to give serious consideration. We've heard it from the community. We heard it from folks who just spoke with us that they want us to give serious consideration to our SOR program, despite all the effort that went into the program. This is a time to act. I think this is a time of reckoning, and I think people are thinking about things more deeply, for lack of a better description. And I think it might be time. I really feel it's time for us to take a close look at that. One thing, it's in the framework, but I want to make it a point of emphasis. I do want to hear back from our municipal court and and Judge Olson about where we stand on the feasibility of Kirkland's own community court diversion program. That's another way we can spend time and effort and money preventing problems before they become safety issues in the community. So I really want to make that a point of emphasis as well. I just want to say, I just want to add one more thing, which is that, this is my perspective as maybe a officer of the court, a lawyer and an officer of the court, just reminding us all and letting the community know that we know that the fairness of our justice system is measured by how fair it is to the most vulnerable among us. And so that is an important touchstone that that for me, and I want it to be an important touchstone for the city when we're looking at law, safety, and justice reform in the city, that we're really looking at it from the perspective of the most vulnerable among us. And again, circling back to my very, very first point, that we're talking to the Black people in our community, that we're hearing from them what would really make a difference. So with that, I would just, my direction to the staff is, whether we can include something in section 2 regarding accountability that at least evaluates independent civilian oversight. And with that, I will yield the rest of my time.
You're muted, Madam Mayor. You're muted. Sorry. Penny, you're muted. Sorry, Mayor. Oh, she knows.
There, my mouse wasn't working. Sorry, Councilmember Curtis.
I didn't know if I was next. Thank you, Madam Mayor. I truly believe that this social moment will lead to transformation in our community. And I really have a heartfelt gratitude to all the people that came forward and spoke tonight. I know it wasn't easy. It had an emotional impact on you, but I want you to know that it also hit my heart too. So I appreciate you, sincerely appreciate you taking the time. I think it's really important as we move through this work that our entire community stands with us, that this is difficult work. It's going to be uncomfortable, but we can make progress on battling racial injustice in our city. So again, thank you for being here tonight. And please, please, please stay engaged, because we need the Black voices in our community to continue to be involved in this process. And as you could tell by the length of this meeting, that it's a slow, time-consuming process, but we truly need your help. I have a number of things that speak specifically to the resolution, so I'm just going to try to go through them as fast as I can, and Councilmember Black did cover a few of them. We've been talking a lot about a police use of force dashboard, but I think that we're not only addressing a violent response to crime, we also want to address implicit bias in our community. And to me, those are two things that don't show up on one dashboard. So my suggestion is many suggestions, but one of them is we do have a regular police department dashboard that we put out quarterly. I think that we need to expand that. Chief Harris did talk about the difficulty of asking people what their race is and so forth, but I do think that tracking demographics of arrests is really important and helpful. I think that we also need to track other types of information, particularly misdemeanor crimes, drug possession, vandalism, loitering, that sort of thing, because I suspect, I don't know, but that could also, those types of crimes, we may find that the percentage of violations are high in the Black community. One question is, collisions are on the dashboard, but that's not a crime. So I'm not sure why that, unless they all are crimes, but I've been in a few collisions and not been cited for a crime. Human resources dashboard, I think that's wonderful. We're doing it. Human services is hugely important. As Councilmember Black said, as we go into the budget process, it's important to break down not only what we're spending in police spending, but what we're spending in human services. And there, again, there's a crossover there, right? We're spending money in human services and we have a MHP in this area, but we're also doing human supports in other areas. So I don't have a suggestion on how to break that down, but I think it's helpful. The SRO, I'm not going to go into should we or shouldn't we have SROs, that's been covered, but I do think an SRO task force or an SRO dashboard would be helpful. What kind of discipline, what students are being impacted, contacts, that sort of thing. Going down to accountability, I think the equity assessment is hugely important and I want us to move forward on that. I don't want it just to be the police department. I want it to look at our entire city, our department. We're one of the largest employers in Kirkland. How are we doing with diversity hiring? How are we doing with our programs? Are our parks programs inclusive? All of those things. So I want that to be a larger one. Housing, transportation. Agree with Councilmember Black that a civilian oversight committee for the police is something that we should move forward. And as we were doing our driving while Black and shopping while Black, that was starting to come out in the conversation. Unfortunately, we were held back from COVID, but I'd like to move forward on that. Same thing with the community court. Community engagement, I talked about that earlier with Chief Harris. I like the idea of police advisory committees being created around different affinity groups. I think that will be helpful. I'm very interested in creating a Black Citizen Advisory Committee. And as Mayor Sweet said, I really hope that some of the people that spoke up today are willing to commit the time and effort in that. And lastly, in funding, I've said this before, but now is the time that we seriously look at funding a diversity, equity, and inclusion manager to be part of city staff to participate in these conversations. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So Councilmember Falcone.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I also want to thank everyone who spoke up tonight. You know, we heard from a lot of folks in the community who have really been impacted by systemic racism throughout their entire lifetime. And it was very brave of you to speak up tonight. And I know that took a lot of emotional labor to do that. So thank you. I just want to lift up the Black voices and what we heard tonight. And so my general feedback to city staff is to re-listen to the public hearing comment that we heard and come back with proposals based on what we heard tonight, what the Black community is asking of us. I know that we've done a fantastic job, staff has so far, meeting with the Right to Breathe committee and listening to those Black leaders in our community. And tonight we heard from some other Black voices that also are very valuable in helping us through this process and giving us very valuable input based on their life experiences. So thank you to everyone who spoke tonight. I also want to thank our city staff, city manager, and our police chief for really being very brave and progressive leaders during this time. We have a lot going on with the pandemic and with these conversations around racial justice. And I'm really proud that our city is leaning into these issues and that our city leadership is being proactive in meeting with Black leaders in our community, and I want us to continue doing that. I want us to continue listening to all the Black voices in our community and elevating what they're asking for us to do. I also want us to really, in our public engagement, I think it's really important. A lot has been said tonight about the importance of building trust with the Black community. You know, our country and our institutions, including our local governments, have been built on, you know, systemic racism for centuries. And this change isn't going to happen overnight, but we need to work to continue to build those relationships. So I encourage us to also intentionally seek out voices that are intersectional with race and other identities, in particular, Black women, Black youth, Black individuals with disabilities, and Black members of the LGBTQA+ community, to make sure that their voices and unique needs are heard and met during this time as well, that we consider all of those voices as we're making this change. I also want us to remember that not all cities are starting at the same point. Kirkland has really done some great work in recent years to prioritize human services. When I was on the Human Services Commission, you know, the last budget cycle, the City Council approved the largest ever investment in human services for the city, with investments in meeting the most basic needs of housing, food, behavioral health, and support for individuals with disabilities. We still have work to do, as we know. You know, we heard when I was on the Human Services Commission last year from a panel of first responders, just the incredible volume of mental health calls that they get, not just our police, but our firefighters as well, and the incredible need for mental health support. And they were asking for multiple mental health professionals to go out in the field. So I'm really proud and glad that we've hired our first mental health professional, and I think that's fantastic. And I'd love to see that program grow. So I'd love to see a proposal in our budget for additional mental health professionals as well to go out with our, to respond to calls. And I know that that's a conversation to have what that exactly that will look like. But as has been expressed, it's not just police calls, but fire and EMT calls as well that we're hearing that need. You know, I care a lot about these issues, as does my fellow council members. And like I said, I'm really proud that we're going down this path. And me personally, I still have a lot to learn. I'm going to stumble. I'm going to misspeak. And I just ask for your grace, the community, and I'll assure you that I'll continue to listen and learn through this process. We're doing this work in the context, as I said, of hundreds of years of government betrayal of the Black community. So I'm committed to building that trust and to having these difficult conversations. And during this pandemic, we've seen our community come together in just amazing ways, and it really gives me a deeper love for our community and hope for our future. This resolution is a demonstration of our commitment to continuing to doing this important work on racial equity in our city. And I echo a lot of the feedback on this resolution that council members Black and Curtis have said. I have some comments on the dashboard as well. I think that's amazing that that we were able to duplicate that with internally. It just shows our amazing skill set of our staff. So that's fantastic. I think it's important for us to consider the context of the numbers, that they be presented either as proportions of each individual demographic, or that the demographic breakdown be shared side by side. For example, it might appear if a small proportion of all uses of force are against just a particular minority community. But if that prevalence is at 5 or 10 times the prevalence of that demographic in our community, then that's disproportionately impacting them, right? So I think that that's really important so that the data are not misinterpreted. I also fully support having an equity assessment, and echo Councilmember Curtis's comments that it really is important to get into the weeds, into the details with such an assessment. There can be things such as, you know, how we do our zoning and our planning, and how we collect, you know, on utilities. And I mean, it really is something that's beyond our policing and really gets into the nitty-gritty details, because again, these institutions were founded on principles of racism and sexism, and there are lingering effects, as we know, to this day. So I think it's really important to get into the details. Also support hiring a DEI position. You know, I know we've talked about, I'd love to see human services be moved into the city manager's office and have DEI in the city manager's office, and there's some overlap there of interest. I agree with Councilmember Black that I'd like to see a plan for removing police from schools and for diverting that funding into more human services. You know, we already have a huge human services need, and we're seeing that grow just exponentially during this pandemic. So as much funding as we can funnel towards that, the better. Also support the advisory committees. So thank you again. Thank you, community members, and thank you, city staff. We're dedicated to having this partnership with you. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Nixon.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Well, I have a lot of notes that I'll digest and share with the city manager. I don't want to just read it to you all now, especially since it duplicates a lot of what has already been said. I will just say that it's very frustrating to an action-oriented, a solution-oriented person like me to be faced with a long list of concerns, but very few proposed actions, very few solutions. Or that the actions proposed are mostly beyond the financial capacity of a city our size. And so I very much am looking forward to the public engagement called for in the resolution and having a very pragmatic conversation with the community about what the city of Kirkland can do that is within our scope as a city government and within the resources we have available. Thanks.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor Arnold.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. First, I really appreciate the voices that we've heard tonight. Even when it was difficult to tell your stories, as a council, we're listening, reflecting, thinking, but we are definitely saying Black Lives Matter.
Turn the sound down.
And we will continue to do that as we move forward. I appreciate Councilmember Falcone setting the context of what we're doing in the city and agree what she's saying. Some specifics in the framework that I'd like to offer some feedback on. To begin with, under transparency, I'd like to be able to look at a data dashboard beyond use of force to get to some of the implicit bias issues. We already seen just from the data we've gone before that we have a potential disproportionate impact that we need to understand more. So if there are ways, we should explore how we get data in other ways up before that use of force to see if there's actions that need to be taken. On the transparency and accountability piece, I'm not sure if I am ready to go to civilian review yet. Traditionally, we have used boards and commissions to do work in more detail than we were willing to do ourselves or able to do ourselves as a council, but we haven't had that opportunity yet. And when I look at, for example, the 2018 annual report, it listed in the Kirkland Police Department 2 reports of unreasonable excessive force, which were exonerated. 6 cases of racial or bias-based profiling, which were deemed unfounded. 3 cases of abuse of authority, which were exonerated or found unfounded. And drilling into those kind of complaints are things I think we should be doing as a council first. I would at least want to look at some of the transparency and accountability pieces there before we look at broader models. I do support the exploration of community court that Councilmember Black and others have talked about. And in fact, within the Kirkland Police Strategic Plan, item 8A talks about communicating regularly with city prosecutors and policymakers on a shared understanding of prosecution priorities and filing standards for the city. I think that's something that council may want to get involved in setting some of those priorities and looking at diversion opportunities. Finally, I'd like to follow up on the conversation that where the chief was responding pretty enthusiastically to Eugene's Cahoots program and co-responders. We're starting to look at that with our mental health professional on staff, and I'd like to look for ways that we could jumpstart and look at expanding that program as part of the budget discussion. Finally, on SRO discussion, I do think that this needs to be an ongoing discussion and look forward to the engagement and would ask that staff had listed town hall as one of the potential engagement methods. I think we should start planning for one, even if it needs to be virtual, because I'd like to have a much broader conversation on that. Thank you.
Okay. I guess I'm just going to, I'm not going to repeat what, or not repeat. I mean, I agree with much of what folks are talking about. We're not all together in the same place. And I tuned in tonight hoping for a big listening session, and I got a marvelous listening session. At the same time, I'm disappointed that we didn't have more Black voices. I am so appreciative to Nikila and Brittany and Zelda and Ngozi and everybody who shared stories with us and is trying to help us move in a direction that will make their lives and the lives of their children better and more equitable with the lives of us and our children. At the same time, I'm very impressed over having served for 11 years now. I love the direction that our police department has gone. I think we are so much better as a department than we were when I first started this job. So I feel like where we are right now is we are more than most cities because of everything that we have gone through and learned and done so far. Is we are more prepared than any city that I know. We are at a tipping point. And the most important element of this influence on this tipping point at this point are the Black voices that are going to help us move in a direction. I'm not exactly sure what all the elements of that direction are going to be. I just think it's very important that we have this framework so we can continue moving in this direction. I'm excited about that. I think we have just loaded a whole lot of work on for city manager and everybody to try and mesh through all of this. But the most important piece of this is that we sustain the relationship, the partner around the Black voices in our community to understand what the right next steps are. Okay, with that, I believe that takes us toward Councilmember Black. You are muted.
If everyone has had a chance to speak, I had one thing to follow up on something that Deputy Mayor mentioned, and that is the evaluating the civilian oversight. I have had a helpful conversation with the city manager about the different permutations that can take. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a full-time commission, body. So when I talk about evaluating, and I'm talking about evaluating it in all its forms. So I'm hoping we can include that in the framework. Thank you.
Okay, I believe that takes us to item number 7, special presentation. Oh, we're just breezing right along. COVID-19 update. City manager.